we're talking about reels again, right? Twice in 1 week. Well, we had to. I mean, I got the comments rolling in. I didn't even look at them all. I just read a couple of them, okay? So let's get over this whole reel thing one more time. But we're gonna go in a little bit different direction this time because the comments I got. Now, if y'all don't know what I'm talking about, you've never seen this video, here's my last video. It was about reels, the biggest mistake when buying a reel. Just the misconceptions. And once again, I still think there's a little bit of misconceptions out there. Now, there's some other things out there too that I think, one, I wasn't talking about, right? So we're gonna talk about like what was getting brought up, but that's not really what I was speaking about. And two is, the other thing that was probably brought up was line retrieve, right? And how much line we retrieve back when we're reeling, right? And I know what that's called, right? What I was doing was putting it in just simpler terms, right? Of just what it takes to reel line in and how you get line in at a quicker rate and what reel that is with gear ratios. But I'm gonna put this on here real quick, okay? So even on the Lose website, if you go down to all their reels, they'll have, here it is. Okay, now that we got that out of the way, we can kind of move on. I know what that is, but remember, doesn't matter if it's gear ratio, it doesn't matter if you want to call it by, I don't want to care if you call it by 35 inches by RPT. It's even on the box, guys, right there, right? Either way, it still matters whether or not this spool is big. So remember, guys, if the line's all the way down at the bottom, you're not going to get this. You're just not, right? And that's really what I was talking about, is the fact that I want this spool bigger and deeper, okay? I want it bigger and deeper because it can hold more line. Now, it's gonna matter too, a lot, like I said, on line diameter. This varies. So regardless of whether it varies or not, I still want this the biggest and the deepest to hold more line and to maximize, how about that? Maximize this number right here, okay? So, like I said, if y'all don't know what that number is, that's why I just talked about in the video. I showed one video of me reeling pretty fast because a fish spat out from the bank and like sharked out of there, right? And that's what I'm talking about. Now, we wanted to talk about gear ratios. Guys, this is the only way I can say it. I'm real big on these magazines and all these things that you hear all the time. You hear all these things and what do they really mean? Well, a lot of people got on here and started talking about torque, okay? And they started talking about gear ratios and what has more torque or not. That's fine. I didn't disagree with you. In fact, I never even brought up the word torque. There's a reason I didn't bring up the word torque, okay? Here's why. Yes, there is more torque on a lower geared ratio reel, okay? Now, what do I throw when I throw a frog? And when I put braid on there and I'm really freaking trying to dig stuff out, I don't go to a low gear ratio. I go to a high gear ratio because I'm trying to catch up most of the time, because I'm trying to reel as fast as I possibly can. Now you're gonna say, wait a minute, don't you want more torque when you're fishing that way? Okay, I'm gonna go two different routes. So don't stop on me on the first one. I'm gonna go to the second one too. Torque is how much this handle can pull in at one time. Like when you're cranking on this, what's easier and what's harder, okay? If you're casting a frog out there, I don't need any torque in this reel. If I'm throwing a worm out there, I don't need any torque in this reel. If I'm throwing a jig out there, I don't need any torque in this reel. There is no resistance when I'm working these baits. So I don't need a lot of torque on the reel when casting in working a bait back, right? Because torque is gonna make this reel handle turn easier with pressure on it, right? But if I throw a worm out there and I'm dragging it back, we don't work the worm with our handle. We work it with our rod. We reel up the slack. It's exactly what I was also talking about when landing fish, okay? Do you need a lot of torque if that fish is running at you? No, because you're trying to catch up. There actually is almost no torque because there's not much pressure on there, okay? So stay with me, guys. Cranking, actually you're out there cranking like this, there's actually resistance. Like throw a 10XD out there, there's actually resistance on that reel, making it harder to turn, which is why we go to a lower gear ratio. Now you're gonna say, well, wait a minute, that's more torque. Exactly, but you really don't need all that torque when fighting a fish on a crankbait. Why? Because we're not trying to crank in a fish just with our reel. And usually cranking, we're not like just grinding them out. It's usually the rod's doing all the work and you're slowly reeling back, right? You're not usually reeling this hard when you got a crankbait fish on there, right? Why do we not reel that hard when we have a crankbait fish on there? Because we have lighter line. If we crank that hard with lighter line, when you're fighting a big fish back, what's gonna happen? You're gonna break your line. So hear me out, guys, right? So start putting all this together. On the flip side, you're gonna say, well, wait a minute, don't I need more torque when I'm throwing braid and a frog and a fish blows up? Okay, this is the way I can say it. We are bass fishing, guys. Bass fishing is different, okay? How we work a bait in or how we land a fish is not like saltwater. When you're saltwater fishing and you got a giant 30-pound bull red out there, right? Your rod can only do so much and it's gonna bend all the way. Your line can only do so much, it's gonna bend all the way. What do you usually need? A little bit more torque and a better drag system. Because they use drag way more in saltwater than we do. I almost don't use drag at all for anything. Spinning rods maybe, but almost everything else, my drag is set so I don't break the line when I set the hook. Rarely do I care about drag when fighting a fish. If I see a fish about to make a giant run or it's going, I push the button most of the time. I just trust it over drag because I don't know really, like I don't like my drag to slip that much on a hook set. Normally my hook set and my line is further out there, so I actually need a little bit more. I need a little bit more to drive that hook in there. So I trust this more than my drag a lot of times. Now I will have my drag set a little bit on certain things, but not much. Let's get back to frog fishing now. Okay, I brought up this reel for frog fishing. This is a 7:2-to-1 reel, okay? That's the gear ratio on it. It's a big, heavy-duty reel for frog fishing. This doesn't have this crazy amount of torque on it. I don't care about torque, and here's why. I want this thing to do two things. When I'm throwing it out there, I don't need torque on working my frog back. There's almost zero resistance on a frog, right? When you're reeling it. So when I throw it out there and I'm working it, I want two things to happen. I don't want this drag to slip when I set the hook. And the main thing is, I don't want my gears to break. My gears, not the torque, my gears. Because when I set the hook, I'm not reeling. I'm just bowing it up. And when I bow it up, that's what's gonna break on this reel, if anything. That's what breaks on almost every reel I've ever owned frog fishing. I've broken them all. So far, I have not broken a gear on this Super Duty. So, torque. Now, do I need torque on this handle? No. Here's why. Normally, with braid and everything else, when I'm reeling a frog fish in, it's pretty easy. Now I can reel down on it really hard. Notice the big handles. I want to get more of this. So the bigger handle allows me to put more torque on it, not the reel. It's hard to put a lot of torque on a smaller handle, kind of like what I was talking about on those small handles from yesterday. So as I throw this out there and I set the hook, I usually start reeling because the fish starts fighting. If I'm hung up, right, and I'm hung up hard, I'm not gonna sit here and crank on it. I will never crank on anything. If you're hung up on something hard, I've never seen someone reel down and try to crank. Okay? We set the hook, fight, and then we hold it all and pull with our rod and reel, hoping the drag doesn't slip. I'm not going for torque. Hoping the drag doesn't slip, hoping the gears don't bust, hoping my rod doesn't break, hoping my line doesn't break. Okay? So I don't need a lot of torque on this handle. I know everyone was bringing up torque with the gear ratios, but like I said, I think it's a little overrated. That's all I'm saying. I think it's overrated. Okay? So I do that, pull as hard as I possibly can, and when it breaks free, then I crank in my slack. 90% of the time, what we're doing is reeling in more slack with our reel and letting the rod fight the fish. Rarely do our handles, do our turning the reel fight the fish. Okay? That's why I didn't bring up torque in that video. That's why with gear ratios and what this is, I understand what RPTs are, rotations per turn, and what kind of, I get all that. I was just trying to put it in layman's terms to let y'all understand of why we're doing it. I'm not getting scientific on y'all. I'm not gonna go into the scientifics of this reel. I could care less what some scientist tells me about their reel. Could care less. They don't fish. They don't know. You put one of those guys out there or some engineer, they're not gonna be as good as us. We know what's going out there on the water better than they do. They can test everything great. We know how we fish though, and what I'm trying to accomplish. Remember that? It's what we're trying to accomplish out there. That's what I was speaking on yesterday. So, it's great about all that other stuff, but that's what I care about more. I never worry about torque on this reel. Rarely ever. When you're hung up, you ever see someone try to reel down and break off? Like you're like, I'm gonna break this off. No one ever reels down as hard as they can and keep reeling until it breaks, right? You reel down as much as you can, then you pull. You pull to break it. That's where your torque is the pull, the bend in the rod, all that. The bigger handle lets you put more torque from, whether you got little guns or big guns. We're the torque. We're the stuff torquing a fish out, not the handle. It's great to have a little bit of torque in your handle, right? Most of these reels have a little bit of torque in them. So, just something else to think about. I'm just gonna throw that all out there. I liked it. I actually wanted to hear more about and listen to what was being said in the comments because it let me come out here and kind of break it down maybe even better. And I actually think I missed a lot of stuff yesterday. I think I missed all this part of it. So, that's my real video. That's what do we want to call it? A better understanding of our reels and what we're trying to accomplish with them. Hope this helped. And I'll probably get twice as many comments on this video. And that's okay. Either way, we got it done. See y'all guys.